Now, Australians vote in national elections on Saturday, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's centre-left Labor government seeking re-election. Just months ago, that seemed unlikely, but their chances of returning to office have been bolstered by turbulence coming from the United States and growing distrust amongst Australians of US President Donald Trump.
It's a global dilemma, Aussie style. Ahead of Saturday's national elections, Australia, like many countries, has recently been asking itself a pretty tough question.
Can we trust Donald Trump to have our back on security?
Yes, and the US...
As trust in the United States among Australians drops, the US president's turbulent diplomacy has actually helped Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of the centre-left Labor Party. After slipping in the polls, they now show him ahead of his challenger. The Conservative coalition leader, Peter Dutton, has had to deny being a kind of Trump light after pledging cuts to the public service and a crackdown on so-called woke culture. On defence and national security, though, the two major parties largely agree but are divided on how to deal with the strategic threat of China. This election, housing and the cost of living are front and centre. Inflation has eased under Albanese, but many Australians are struggling, leading to promises to make life less expensive.
Vote for Labor means the certainty of Medicare, the security of being able to see a GP when and where you need it without worrying about whether you can afford it.
Today I bring a message of hope to all Australians seeking to own a home of their own. I will be a Prime Minister who restores the dream of home ownership.
On climate and energy, Dutton's plans to introduce nuclear power and shift the focus away from renewables have divided voters, but many Australians still want urgent climate action.
Certainly climate change, incredibly important.
I think there's been a lot of disregard for our climate policy.
And I'm hoping somebody in this election is going to make a difference and protect all of us, but particularly the next generations.
If neither major party wins outright, the Greens and climate-focused independents could play a significant role. With many choosing to vote early, Australians are in part deciding who they think can best shield them from global uncertainty.
Well, that report from DW's Jared Reid, who joins me now. Well, welcome, Jared. Let's start with the Trump effect in this election.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump kind of really has turned this election on its head, because we can compare where things stand now to where they were just a couple of months ago. And the polling showed it really looked like Australians were getting ready to turf this one-term Labor government out of office, because the centre-right opposition was ahead in the polls on the back of really deep voter anger over rising cost of living, unavailable housing, a housing crisis. But then Donald Trump came along, and all of the associated turbulence and chaos that we've seen so far in his second term, particularly the imposition of tariffs, which really coincided with the beginning of the Australian election campaign. And I think Australians looked at what was going on and could see some of the turbulence in the stock markets from that, and how they were affecting their hip pockets, their pension funds and their shares, and sort of decided to become a little bit more risk averse, you might like to say. And the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, also probably didn't help himself when he sort of adopted some policies that he was accused of taking a leaf out of the Trump and Elon Musk playbook. So I think all of these factors have combined together to deliver what is a pretty big turnaround for the incumbent Labor Party.
And so what does this say about the US-Australia alliance?
Well, this is not the first election in which the US has played a role in Australia, and every so often Australians ask themselves questions about the alliance around election time. In the last couple of years, Australia has been really deepening ties actually with the US security-wise through the AUKUS agreement, which is to build these nuclear-powered submarines with the United Kingdom. But I think what's different now is Australians value the alliance, but they're looking at the US a little bit more suspiciously. They're wondering, can they completely rely on the United United States. And we can see some of that in what the major parties are saying on defence, promising to deliver more on defence and defence spending. I think among Australians, we have seen recent polling showing that trust in the United States is falling. I think Australians understand how key the US is to Australian security, but are looking at the relationship with a bit more distance and suspicion, possibly.
Okay, let's talk about China, the US's big foe, but Australia's biggest trading partner.
Yeah, that's right. China has not been such a big factor in this election as it was 3 years ago in the last election. And that's because the relationship between Australia and China has really improved in the last couple of years. The Albanese government has once it came into office, the ties really got a lot better. And so I guess the tone has changed in that relationship, but I guess the suspicion and the wariness is still there, because while the success of China is key to Australian prosperity, Australia is looking at China with suspicion in terms of it wanting to get a bigger security foothold in the Asia-Pacific. And we can see some differing positions from the major parties on China. The opposition wants a tougher stance. It says China is Australia's biggest security threat, while the government is being a little bit more cautious and urging caution there. So China is kind of still bubbling away in the background, but hasn't been a bigger factor in this election.
And a brief word about voting, which starts tomorrow. Australia, one of a short list of countries with compulsory voting.
That's right. So it's been around, I looked up, for 101 years, compulsory voting in Australia. If you're aged 18 and over and you're eligible to vote, you have to vote. And if you don't vote, you get a fine of $20, which is about $13 US. And what that's done is really increase participation rates to the point in which Australia has some of the highest voter participation rates in the world.
Thank you for that, Jared Reid. Thank you so much.